I can only see Joe, but I hope to see some of the rest of you during this training. Just a few words about how this is going to be organized. I have sent the PowerPoints to you, and the PowerPoints had pretty detailed information because I wanted you to have this to go back to, because today I'm basically going to be very practical and talk about, so how do we do qualitative analysis? I'm not going to be talking about theoretical speculations about what is behind qualitative research or anything like that. It's just really practical guidelines on how you work with your data. And Mark, he sent out a really good chapter on coding, which I recommend people read. And at the end of my slides is a list of books that I refer to. So it's important for you to read methodology books while you're doing your research. It's really helpful and validating and helps you have more insights and knowledge about what you're doing and more guidelines. So we have 2 hours, but both Joe and I can stay 30 minutes or half an hour longer if needed, if people want to talk. I have organized it so that I will cover a few slides, 9 or 10 slides, and then I will invite people to bring questions or comments, or we can have a discussion. And after the discussion, we'll have a 5-minute break. So this is at the regular intervals. I will stop for discussions. So I think it's best to organize it so that I go through the slides, a number of them first. And along the way, if you have questions, just please write them down. I'm not going to use the chat box because I want this to be more interactive. And I like this to be, so we can talk and not just write to each other, because we meet so rarely. So I think that's better. So any comments about that? Okay, so let's just start. So the question is, so what the hell is data analysis? And it is really the process when the researchers go carefully and systematically through the research data. And it can be any data. It can be data that you have as transcribed interviews, and it's really essential that you transcribe your interviews in order to be able to analyze them properly. These can be field notes that are written down after participant observations in the field, or these can be data that comes from other sources, like legal documents, school curriculums, memos, policy papers, any kind of document. Or these can even be personal documents that you obtain from people. Some qualitative researchers ask participants to write diaries that they then analyze. Or some people have life histories of participants that they also use to analysis. So it can be public or personal data. So, but the goal of the data analysis is to understand what is in the data, and to help organize the knowledge that the data contains, so that you can be able to share it with others. Because that's what you have to do as a PhD student. You have to write down your findings and how you did not only your findings, you also need to write about how you did your research. So it's really important to be good at understanding the methodology and the methods that you use, so you can write about them, convincing the examiners of your thesis that you have a good grasp on how you did the research, not only your findings. So methodology and methods are really important. So how you do the analysis is that you work systematically with the data. It's important to organize it so that you have a good overview and good organization of the data. You don't have it all messy and, in complex state. And you need to break up the work of the analysis into manageable steps. Often people have a lot of data they have collected and have not started to analyze, and it seems not very doable to analyze it. So part of what I do today is to help you sort of break it into steps that make it easier to work with the data and analyze it. And when we analyze the data, we are looking for themes, concepts, ideas, patterns in the data. And often when we go further along, we need to figure out how to connect these concepts and themes that we have found there, so that it makes a more holistic picture. And we want to gain an overview and try to get a holistic picture of the data we have. And data analysis is really to discover what is important in the data. And it is often other things that we had anticipated on beforehand, especially in qualitative data. And the data analysis is done in order for us to learn, discover what can be learned from the data. Very important aspects is to know, especially for beginners, is that the analysis part of qualitative research is often extremely difficult and scary for beginners. That is why it is so important to break it up into manageable steps and start early doing the analysis. Unfortunately, people tend to avoid the data analysis because they don't know how to do it, and they just continue collecting data and do not do much analysis. And that usually, if people do that, that can create serious difficulties down the road when you're faced with 1,000 pages of data and you think, okay, here is where my PhD ends. I cannot possibly manage all of these pages. They're undoable. So this training is meant for you not to be with a 1,000-page, unsolvable pile. So analysis are very challenging and for beginners especially, but it's also really the most exciting part, because that is where you discover all kinds of new things and get these incredible insights into things that you really did not understand on that same level. I have often said that during my research, I have had better insights, understandings, and grasps, and intimate knowledge of some of my participants than I have of some of my closest family members. We often so intensely focus on our research that we discover all kinds of really interesting things and important insights and knowledge that are in the data, but can only be discovered through the analysis, not at just glancing the data. So even if when you read the methodology books, very often it says, okay, you collect the data and then you analyze the data and then you write. This is not correct. This is not how you really do it. Actually, it is correct that at the end of the, towards the end of the research period, there is a particular time that is devoted to the analysis, where you have finished data collection. But data analysis should start with your first interview or your first data collected. And it should continue throughout the entire research period. And in qualitative research, data analysis is an inseparable part of the research process and the sort of unfolding focus and design of the research project, because you need to analyze your data in the beginning and look at what is there, what can I learn from that, and what did I not think of asking, what came up that I was not prepared to mention, and I had no idea would be so important for the person, so that the focus and the emphasis changes along the way if you do the analysis, simultaneously. So there are two main sort of steps or two periods of data analysis. The first one is analysis during the data collection. So this is when data collection and data analysis go hand in hand, and the researcher is constantly trying to understand the data already collected. And with my students, I always ask them, after your first interview and your second and third, after your interview, you should write reflections or a memo that reflects on, so what is important in this interview? What did I learn that was new? What was surprising? What is confirming of what I expected to learn? And write about this, draw out these issues. And so what should I keep in mind for the next interview? What should I remember to ask for? Or if I talk to someone who is different from this person, what should I have in mind then, based on what I already know? This is really helpful to make the data collection focused. Anyone who has done qualitative interviews and has transcribed the interviews knows that it's a lot of work. And so it's really important that we do this in a focused manner so that we do not spend a lot of time collecting data that turns out then not to be very focused on what we are learning or what's important for the study. And we really don't know in qualitative research often what is most important until when we have started and discover in the field what's important for people. I have taught qualitative research in more than a quarter of a century, and even people who are really familiar with what they're studying, they also learn something new and unexpected, see things they did not expect. I especially remember one education professional. She had been a teacher all her life, and she had been a headmaster in a grammar school. She wanted to study in her MA. She came to MA late in life because it was not offered in Iceland until she was had been working for many years. She wanted to study the interaction between teachers and students in a classroom. And there were so many things that were surprising to her, even after all her years. It's just because she had a different perspective. She was analyzing things not from a principal's view, but from a researcher's view. So, yeah. And then it's analysis after data collection. And that is the period towards the end of the research, after the data collection has been completed. Then there is a state where you go systematically through all of the data. And then this is combined with writing up of the findings. And analysis and writing must go hand in hand. I'll talk more about that later. So I assume most of you are still doing data collection. So it's really helpful to do the analysis during collecting data. And this helps you make decisions that narrow the focus of the study. Usually we start by throwing the net pretty wide because you want to see what's out there and how people are thinking, doing, acting in certain areas that we are researching. And after we have collected some data, we usually need to narrow the focus because it's not doable to research everything, even if that's really interesting. So the analysis during the data collection helps you narrow the focus and help you collect more focused data. And also, you need at some point to make quite sure, so what kind of research is this? And what is the story you choose to tell? Because from each research project, you can really tell different stories, and it can be a different kind of research with the same data. So you need to decide where you're going to have your focus and what kind of research this project basically is going to be. And so at this point, at some point, you develop and revise the research questions. That's very common in most research projects, that you have to revise the research questions to, And then you plan and organize and select participants. And in the light of what you have already learned and who is important to interview next, or what kind of documents you should obtain to gain insight into how things have developed, or what are the latest policies, or whatever you are doing. So by doing analysis during data collection is really helpful for you to be focused and systematic in your data collection. Saves a lot of money, time. And I'm going to talk about analytic memos later on, but analytic memos are ways of writing about what you're learning and to keep track of your insights. So it's really essential that we write down the insights and understandings that we are developing. Otherwise, it gets lost. We don't remember good ideas we have, even if they're excellent ideas, and then we go somewhere else or do something, and then it's gone. So make a habit of writing memos. These are only for yourself. Nobody else needs to see it. And, write down your sort of wildest insights or your most cautious, analysis. Or writing about your data is really thinking deeply about your data. So writing, these are called analytic memos because they are a part of the analysis, keeping track of the analysis. And you can write them separately. You can write them as reflections on your data. You can write them at the end of your transcript. Just the most important thing is that you write down. And that is a part of trying out sort of how things work within your data. And then what you're finding, it's often important to try out these ideas or themes with your participants. Just check, in other interviews, if your insights sort of, if if the other participants or the same participant agrees with you. And at the end, some people sometimes have some participants read their analysis just for validation or feedback or whatever. But at this point, I'm suggesting you check with your participants if you have some ideas and have them validated or rejected. That's important. And then it's interesting to play with metaphors and analogs and different kinds of concepts to describe what you're finding in the data. And I remember one of Megan's first response after her first interviews with parents about reproductive rights was that the metaphor of conflict and conflict resolutions, because they used a lot of concepts of battle and struggle and stuff like that. So that's sort of one example from one ESR. I'm not sure that's still her metaphor, but it's important to play with these and see, so what does this remind me of? And some people find it really helpful to write out graphs or draw things, not just write. So different forms of presenting the data and look at it is helpful. And all along, I suggest that you read about theories. You all have your theoretical sort of background now, suggested through your research proposals, and just read about theories and other people's research, and read books on methodology and methods. That's very inspiring and helpful for most people. Just really helpful. And you may have read a methodology book at the outset, but after you have done your own data collection, after you have started your analysis, you will read the methodology texts with different insights and understandings because you relate to it based on your experience. So please keep reading along with data collection. Then analysis after data collection. Then, you have all your data, and at that point, you read and reread carefully and with close attention all of your data. You ask yourself, so what is there and what is not there? That's often really interesting. What is not in the data? You sort of need to go through the data, interrogate it very, systematically and intensely. And while you do this, you write down ideas, concepts, insights, themes, patterns, etc. Very often, you can identify some categories or types in the data. Sort of, I remember one information and library specialist who did research with me on how academics collected, scientific readings, or how they collected literature, and she used metaphors from I'm not sure what do you call it, from farmers and those who have some just grazed everywhere. Some, it was, she found different categories of how people collected their academic literature that they wanted to draw on. This was before the internet. So you very early on find certain patterns and certain types. In one of my research, I talked to mothers or parents, mostly mothers who had disabled children, and they were clearly, they all did the same thing as mothers, but they understood and approached being mothers in very different ways. So some of them became really activist mothers who became leaders in the parents' movement. So it was really empowering for them. They became like one of them became the assistant secretary of in the U.S. government. And then some of them just said, well, he's my son, and da-da-da-da-da. And then, many of them became very traditional mother. I mean, there was sort of clearly categories that popped out. You will soon find some kind of sort of categories or types. And then you need to develop concepts and conceptualizations about what you are learning so you can, address it, in a more scholarly way, sort of, and continue after the data collection. It's in that period of analysis, it's important to continue playing with metaphors and all kinds of concepts. And please continue reading about theories and research, and think about the story you want to tell or that you want to develop. Like I said before, there are very different stories that can be told based on basically the same research project, research data. Okay, so I'm going to give you one example of grounded theory approach to data analysis, which is called the constant comparative method. Grounded theory is really the methodology, qualitative methodology that has developed this way of coding the data. Other methodologies in ethnography, narrative studies, in discourse analysis, content analysis, document analysis, they have taken up this way of working systematically with the data. And coding is not only a qualitative, a grounded theory way to analyze data. Everyone has taken this up. Some people identify themselves doing grounded theory, and there are certain body of literature on grounded theory, but also those who identify themselves as doing discourse analysis, they do really, really systematic coding, even more systematic than in grounded theory, but they're looking for different things, which I cannot go deeply into, but yeah. So this is what is called the constant comparative method. And most people use this. Not everyone refers to it as this. And even if you do not identify as doing grounded theory, just say you use a grounded theory approach to data analysis. And then people who are well versed in qualitative research will understand what you mean. So what you do is that you begin collecting data, and right from the start, you start looking for key concepts, themes, patterns, reoccurring issues, etc. in the data. And you collect data that gives really a diverse picture of what you're studying. Most people try to find a diverse group of people. Even if you're only studying teachers or lawyers, you try to find those who have been working long in the field, those who have recently graduated, or so that you try to get, or those who work in different fields as teachers or lawyers. And so you really, if you want to focus on something, you try to get a diverse picture so you can get a better grasp of what's going on. And you write analytic memos about these, the concept issues, the insights, the different points of view, the conflicting ways people talk about things, you know, the patterns and what meanings people attach to what they do. And so you go back and forth, you analyze every interview you do, and then you base your next interview or next step in data collection on what you have already learned, so that you can be really focused in your analysis. And all along the way, you work with the data, you polish the concepts, you try to develop your insights that are beginning to take form. And this is what you do. You continue collecting data, you code and write memos about your data, and continue based on your unfolding analysis and your unfolding insights and understandings. And then you select new participants or settings, if you're, if that's appropriate, in view of the analysis that you have already done and the data is already there. So you continue in view of the emerging findings and insights. Jesus, I thought that, okay, so there are only 2 more slides until we have a break. So coding really includes the sorting of the data. You mark parts, sentences or paragraphs or bits of the data with a short name, which we call codes. This both explains and summarizes what each part is about. And you can have this one part you have taken, it can be coded by 2 or 3 different codes. It can be an example of, you know, different things that are in the data. So the codes will help you select, identify, and sort the data with the intention of further analysis, which I will describe better after the break. So these codes can be seen as a building block of the analysis, blocks that you can connect in various ways. And coding helps you figure out what's in the data, what it contains, and what it tells you. It's a very important first step in systematic analysis. So it moves the researcher from detailed descriptions in the text, you know, in the documents, in the transcript interviews, towards an understanding based on concepts. So here's an example of sort of a metaphor for you to, you know, help you think about how you do this. So one way to think about the sorting of the data by marking parts or bits of it with short names that explains and summarizes what each part is about. So envision a big gymnasium with a large pile of children's toys. So now it's your task to sort them. And you will find out that there are extremely many and different ways to sort them. So of course the toys is your data. So you can sort the toys by color, you know, red and green and blue or whatever, or by the material they're made of, plastic, you know, wood, metal. Or you can sort them based on what kind of play they, you know, support, like Are these building things for buildings? Is this for role play, or what kind? Or is this for indoors or outdoors play? Or you can sort this based on what age these toys are appropriate for, and so on and so forth. And so that it is easy to see that each toy can be sorted in different ways. It can be sorted by color or, you know, whatever. So this is, I think, a good way of sort of helping thinking about, you know, how you can do sort of sort and code in different ways. So now we have, sorry, I went on longer than I expected. Now we have time for questions and comments. I just need to find, I lost the picture. All right, now I have changed to, so I can see you guys. So maybe you want to raise your hand, or will you help me, Joe, in sort of figuring out? So please please questions or comments.
Hi, Randall. I have one comment, if I may. Thank you very much for that introduction. Now, when I at the beginning of this seminar, I thought you were going to be talking about things which I knew very little about, because I know that you've done a lot of research which involves interviews and focus groups, and I haven't done any of that research. But what your description of collecting data and using data actually resonated very much with me in terms of the research that I've done looking at court judgments. So that is data, and Randrig, you know the project that I worked on looking at how courts in various jurisdictions were using the CRPD, the Disability Convention. So I had to identify all the court judgments in a particular jurisdiction. I was working on Australia for one chapter, all the court judgments in a particular jurisdiction that mentioned the CRPD once or more. And I did that through obviously doing research on case law databases. And all of the things that you were describing in terms of qualitative data and quantitative data, and kind of reading that and then reflecting on what you were looking for and adding different, if you like, different research questions. All of that fitted completely with the research project that I carried out in that sense, in that context. So really, the comment that I wanted to make is, I know that you come very much from a background of interviewing and focus groups and that kind of qualitative research, but what you're describing also worked and was completely appropriate for this analysis of case law, of legal documents. And I hadn't expected to connect and to find so familiar all the things you were saying, because I haven't done the kind of research that you've done. But it really did reflect the kind of the qualitative and the quantitative research that I did in terms of analysing documents, specifically court cases. That was my comment.
Well, thank you, Lisa. This is exactly my point, that no matter what you are really analyzing, if you are analyzing text, transcripts from interviews or court documents, I mean, you have to go through these steps. Otherwise, you cannot work systematically with it. So thank you for validating that. That was really, really helpful. Okay, Maria?
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I was wondering, I'm doing my field work right now, and I'm doing online meetings with my co-researchers, and I'm recording them, and then I take field notes afterwards. But I don't think I've separated analytical reflections from the field notes? Like I was listening to you, how you mentioned them really separately. Do I need to make that separate for some reason?
Okay, so what I teach people to do is that they write the field notes or transcribe the interview, but then you have your thoughts about it, and it's important. Sometimes it's not easy to separate the description because you are there and you have, you know, certain views on it. But try to separate and put in parentheses and sort of maybe indent a text called observation comments. In the literature, it's called OC. And write, so what do you think about what's going on here? And this is really the first step in the analysis. Just, you know, and often what you write down as your observer's comments in the in the field notes or in the interview transcripts are issues that you do not know how to understand in the beginning, but are issues that turn out later to be really interesting. So it's very important and validating for you later on to see where your observer comments have been, and if you have sort of clicked about something right from the beginning, but not really known how to understand it or what to make of it. And that's very common. And when I read like transcript interviews, I always look very carefully for the observer comments. I read them more carefully than anything else because that tells me how my student is thinking about the data, and if the analytic process is going on, and if people are really thinking about and paying attention to. But then at the end of the interview, I always ask people to read these reflections, which are really memos, but in the beginning, I call them reflections because people find it hard to think about memos when they are starting out. But writing about the data, so what did I learn here? What is important? You know, and the other thing that I didn't mention earlier is that I ask my students to write, so how did I do as a researcher? Where was my strength? What can I do better? Because as a qualitative researcher, you are the main research tool. So you have to keep one eye on yourself, and then the other eye very fixed on the data. So yeah, can try to keep separate what you make of it, and then the detailed descriptions, that is the basis of your analysis.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, I think Mark, maybe?
Hi.
Hi, Mark.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I was just thinking about Jennifer Mason's book, that little book that she has on qualitative researching. And there's one useful thing in there where she talks about how useful it is to separate 3 different ways of reading this data, which kind of answers exactly what you were saying. But sometimes it's helpful to separate those. So in your data, it's useful to have a record of what she would say is a literal reading of the data. You know, what did the person actually say? What did the judge in the case actually write in the judgment? You know, what does the policy document actually say? What is in the law? So having a literal record, a transcript, is really useful. But then also understanding that when we read those as a researcher, we have interpretations of that data. So we think, well, the document, the policy says this, but of course, in context, it might mean this. So our interpretation of what the person might have meant, or what the document might might have said, or they would say that, wouldn't they? Because of the historical context or whatever. And then thirdly, she talks about this idea of a reflexive reading of how the data affects us and our judgment, either emotionally or in terms of influencing our analysis. And so this idea of having analytical memos or interpretive memos or reflexive memos, the idea of separating them from literal transcripts can be quite useful as long as you can link them back through your coding. So whether you have them as separate documents or whether you have them as an appendix at the front of an interview, sometimes we do that. So we do an interview transcript, a literal reading, and then we'll do like a 1-page, maybe 400 or 500 word summary of the interview, a kind of interpretive summary on the first page, something like that.
Yeah, that's how Steve Taylor does it, or did. But yeah, I agree that, and I will address this later on. It's who are we in relation to our data? That's also incredibly important. So yeah. So Jerome?
You may get to it later, but first of all, thank you very much for all this. This is fantastic, especially your experience in the past. You may get to this point later, but do you recommend or do you try to avoid data analysis software? The market for qualitative data analysis software exploded sometime in the past couple of years. There used to be something which I used 25 years ago called Nudist, which doesn't exist anymore. But there are lots of them, and Vivo and Atlas, and there are various others. Now, first of all, I'll give my view. I don't trust it. That's my view, and that's because I'm an emeritus like you. But what's your take on it?
Well, I think for beginners in qualitative research, it's incredibly important to both transcribe and code by hand and not through any kind of programs. I think it's really important that you get a grasp of your data that way. I think there is a place for these programs and softwares, mostly if there are very large research groups that work together and they can, put their data into the same sort of data bank, and they can analyze collectively, each other's nodes. So it can be helpful. What I think is that in-depth analysis also means reading what is not there, reading behind the words. The insights that are not expressed with a same concept with every informant or in every interview, but people are really talking about the same. And this it's possible, but I think it's very hard to do this in-depth analysis with a software program. But sometimes you are doing a big data set and you need to write a report that's not in-depth or whatever. So, I mean, I think people should try it and see if they like it. I don't like it because it didn't really exist when I started doing my research, and I want to have this sort of closeness to the data. I personally feel like, the software is a bit of a barrier between me and the data. But that's
just one comment. I have never used it or seen anyone use it, but there are now applications that can use multiple languages. So you have a built-in Google Translate or some other kind of translation, so you can analyze everything in one language. I'm not recommending. I just noticed that they exist.
I don't think that's easy. And also, many of the people are the ESRs. Many of you are doing research with people that are not, the participants' first language. So it's hard to be able to sort of identify concept because you mostly use the analysis by identifying concepts. But if for beginners, it's important to do this by hand. And Marissa, Adriana, okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm glad you have a mask so you don't infect me.
Oh no, sorry, I'm at my workplace, so
Okay.
we have mask on inside. Thank you as always for your presentation. That was really enlightening and really cool as well for me, as this is my first kind of entrance into qualitative research. As like a practitioner, I have a law background. I wanted to kind of comment on something that Maria was talking about earlier, because I am also doing my interviews completely online. And with the way the rollout is going in my country, as well as Ireland, I anticipate the coding, as well with my co-researchers, is also going to be online. So I think that that's something that is kind of important to kind of touch on a little bit, maybe later in the discussion as well, and the reflexivity, is that these spaces are rather liminal in the sense that the coding will be done with other people online. And that's what's kind of difficult, I think, in terms of my analysis, is that I write down a lot of things that are mostly about, thoughts and feelings and different insights, but it's also about the challenges of doing this completely online and completely via Zoom. So I think that we have an exciting opportunity as researchers, especially those of us who are doing interviews online, to kind of provide these insights, because we were living during a very unique time where I think that we have to kind of account for the fact that we're doing this during a pandemic. So yeah, no, thank you.
Well, I think that when you write your methods part for a journal article or for your thesis, then you need to describe how the coronavirus interrupted or influenced your research, so that you had to do your interviews online. But I'm not quite sure I understand why your coding is online.
So I'm working with co-researchers, and my co-researchers are in a different country. At the moment, it's looking as I won't be able to see them in person for the coding, which would be ideal because they have learning disabilities. So I think that I will have to amend this in a way on Zoom, which can be a novel approach. But at the same time, I don't know within the time frame of the project I have time to wait out to do coding in person. That's
Okay,
what's a bit of a struggle.
Okay, now I understand. Sorry
Yeah.
to interrupt.
No worries.
You do not do the coding online. You do the coding where you are with your data, and then you discuss the coding online with your co-researchers. All of the coding and analysis applies equally to you. The only online part is your discussion with your co-researchers.
There's online. Okay. Thank you for your guidance on that.
You have to work with your transcripts or data, text on your own, apparently, and then discuss the coding and the emerging findings and analysis. So that's the online part.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yes, Rados, did I miss anyone?
Yeah, I had the same issue as Marissa because I planned to do the co-analysis of the data with my co-researchers, right? So online. So I'm doing I'm planning to do exactly what you said, Ranmik, to maybe take the excerpts from the interviews and then discuss them with the co-researchers and try to identify the key topics. And then on the basis of this, key topics or themes, I will be coding myself on my computer, but the very discussion and determination of these themes and topics will be happening right in the online conversations.
Yeah, exactly. Great. So I think maybe we should take a 5-minute break now, and then I will continue to talk about more analysis and memo writing. Okay, 5 minutes. Is that enough, or do people want longer break? Okay, 5 minutes. All right. We meet